on my devices, so I think we hit this big red button and start actually playing. Awesome, welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here today, present advanced regionalization and personalization using Drupal 8. Please post your questions in the chat with the prefix Q so that it is easier for us to gather and answer at the end of the session. And let's get rolling. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about me and who is that person who is talking to you on the other end of the camera. I'm currently a senior Drupal architect at Kalamuna, and I'm a former Drupal solutions lead at Digital Echidna, Drupal 8 and 7 certified Acquia Grandmaster, and I'm trainer and speaker. I love Drupal, have been doing Drupal for over 6 years now, and in general, very excited to be here and sharing my knowledge with you guys. So, the challenge for this session was a project that I finished while working with Digital Echidna. So I would like to say a huge thank you to the team for allowing me to present this project here today and share the knowledge with everybody. So the challenge was that Wolfsteel Ltd company came to us a couple of years ago, and they would like to come up with the solution to gather their web properties together under one digital experience umbrella. So at the moment of them approaching us, they had about 20 different web properties in different regions and languages. They were all managed by regional editorial teams, and they were on different technologies. They were looking for a solution that would solidify this platform and connect everything together, streamline editorial experience, and also allows them to manage it more effectively and in one place. As a hosting provider, we collaborated with Acquia that supported us in terms of a server implementation of this project. And another challenge that we're kind of following under this bigger scope was that different regions may use different terms in terms of terms for the approach and marketing. So some regions would use the word grills, when other regions would use the words barbecues. Also, different products would also be different per region. They might be the same looking product, but based on the legal regulation, they will have slight differences. So therefore, we'll consider it to be different products. And they also needed to be regionalized. And in terms of marketing, the team told us that they had slightly different segments and personas based on the region. Certain regions were more focused on one thing, while other regions had a different appeal. So it was very important for the editors to be able to target the correct audience per region and also tailor marketing experience to that persona. They also wanted to have a seamless editorial experience where editors were able to create the content once and publish it everywhere. So with this challenge and our belt in our hands, we kind of moved into a first step, which was the regionalization. So regionalization is not quite the same as translation or setting up a multilingual site. It could be the same language, however, that language may differ based on the region. For example, US English would be slightly different than UK English, and the terms and words would be different as well as sometimes phrases and marketing copy. So why regionalize? Because regionalization is actually something that is very important for the global world. We have content that might be more tailored or focused for the different region, answer different region demands, as well as allow very familiar terms and words used for the specific demographic, specific nation, specific language group. And it would allow for the better user experience and the better content overall that is very important for the marketing website. And as I mentioned, it also would allow us to address some language variations. So the approach we took was starting with brainstorming the ideas. The first step that we thought would be useful is to create a multi-site. So when we started evaluating this normal multi-site setup for Drupal, we figured it out that in this specific case, it wouldn't be a good fit because it would be too many databases to manage, and the editors would need to have some sort of a master or main database that would gather all of the content and then cascade it to the regional sites. It would increase the complexity. It also wouldn't fit the desired URL pattern, since the client already had the ability to have regional sites by the region, like uk.napoleon.com or us.napoleon.com. They really didn't want to continue this strategy. They actually wanted to have a balanced one domain experience where everything would live under napoleon.com / and then the regional content will go after that. So when we started playing with the URL patterns, we ran into some difficulties. For example, napoleon.com /fr/fr, where first fr would be a region and the second would be a language. It was creating us the infinite loops with the symlinks because of the setup, because Drupal couldn't quite resolve two FRs in a row. That obviously could have been overridden within htaccess. However, that would present a new challenge that it would be harder for us to add new regions without a developer help. And one of the ideas behind the site was that editors would be, or site administrators would be able to spin off new regions fairly easily because the company was growing and expanding globally. We also evaluated Site Factory Acquia-based multi-site solution, but at that moment, we didn't consider it to be quite a fit for the specific ideas and goals that the client was approaching. So we decided to take a radical approach of keeping everything under one database. Now, a disclaimer, if you have a high-end website with 800 multi-sites, such a big installation, definitely not a fit for that approach. That's more like a site factory approach, actually. But in terms of our use case, when we knew that we will have from 20 to 50 websites merged together, it was nice when we evaluated the impact on the database, impact on the queries, potential growth, and all our tests showed that that would be a good approach, and that allowed us to actually create content once and publish on all the regions. So we went with a single database approach. The first step was to set up the translation. And there could be multiple things addressed in here. We potentially could go with regionalizing by language and region. So we could set up languages like UK English and then US English as custom Drupal languages, but that would affect URL prefixes. So for example, it would be not /UK, but it would be /en-UK /en-US. That wasn't a desired approach. And on top of it, it would increase the complexity. So an editor will have to have a conscious decision of which English to choose, or which German to choose, or French to choose. Is it Canadian French or France French? So it was way easier to actually simplify the setup and have one language and then just regionalize on top of the language. So I came up with an idea that we'll have one language and without any regional variations. So there will be English, French, German, so on and so forth. And then we will regionalize on top of it. In terms of language setup, I also thought that it would be best if we simplify the setup and keep a regional language of the nodes always English, because every single region would have an English no matter what. And it doesn't have to be a region's default language, but it will have English anyways. And because of that, I set up the site so that the regional language would be English, and that would simplify views queries and Solr indexing and working with this content later on. So that would simplify the backend infrastructure of the site. So we needed to set up regions. So we needed to place the content in some sort of a context. And the context module came to a rescue. I worked with it on Drupal 7, and I was very pleased with its capabilities. So I decided to evaluate it for the Drupal 8. And the evaluation was great. It did evolve quite a bit, and it actually utilized core capabilities for the contextual reactions and conditions. And that was awesome. So we decided to install the context module on the site and needed to figure out how to create the conditions and reactions. The easiest thing that came to mind is to create the taxonomy condition, because it's easy to modify, easy to edit based on the editorial workflow, and it's also can be easily applied to all of the nodes. That's what we did. We created regional taxonomy, which called region, and then we added all of the regions into this taxonomy. So you can see on the screenshot that I have context, and every single context actually matches this taxonomy term. And then we made it to attach this region taxonomy to every single node. On top of that, client came up with a challenge that they would like to not only regionalize the content, but also split it by divisions. Even though we were launching with one division, Grills, they knew that they were going to grow and eventually bring in fireplaces and HVAC context into the site. So I did set up a secondary context on top of the region that was called divisions. And similar to the regional context, we created the taxonomy term, Grills, that was applied on top of it. Even though we were launching with just Grills, I also needed to incorporate the corporate information on the site, like about us, becoming a dealer, careers, all of that. So that wasn't going under the Grills context, and we decided to set up a default context or no division context that would be responsible for the corporate. So that said, we got the additional advantages of using taxonomies. Quickly, we realized that context module was great and powerful in terms of some predefined conditions, that those conditions were not enough for all of the possible things that we needed to track and customize per region. Things like language, the default language for the region, all possible languages, menus that would be used, URL prefix, because who knew that we needed to have grills for US and then barbecues for Canada and barbecues for UK, and different variations of this word throughout multiple regions as a URL prefix. And on top of it, we also needed to figure out how to serve the correct landing pages, correct search, and also give editors the ability to hide the region and work on it, on its content behind the scene without showing it to the end user. So I did create another checkbox called active region or not. All of these properties actually got stored into the taxonomy term. And surprisingly, I was using taxonomy in a very unconventional way. I did set up it so it is referencing language object, and it's a referencing menu configuration entity. I never thought that was possible before I did it, but I was very thankful for the new Drupal entity API and ability to reference those new entities that would never be possible in Drupal 7. So now our taxonomies acted as containers, and we got also benefits so that they were exposed to the editors. So then it took away the strain from the development team, and editors were able to just update this data and achieve new behaviors that they wanted. So let's say update a home page, update a URL prefix, attach a new language. So for example, if we were to start launch Switzerland region with English and German, you could also add French later on, and that didn't require any development. All it required was just populating that language reference field in the taxonomy term. So that was a pretty powerful context. And then on top of it, we put that taxonomy required as a required field on every single node to ensure that every single node has a context. So as a result, we got this. So you can see that here we have a screenshot of two different headers. One is for Canada and one is for Switzerland. And you see that they look very familiar, however, a little bit different. So you see that in Canada, we have 2 languages available, English and French. Together on the site, we had 10 languages, but they were filtered down by the context and that entity reference to the language. And then we see that the default language for Canada is English, and then for Switzerland, we have English and German is a default language for the Switzerland region. You also see that top user menu is actually different that in Switzerland and Canada. In Canada, we have 3 divisions, which is fireplaces, barbecues, and heating and cooling. And in Switzerland, it's only grills. And you also see that main navigation differs based on the region as well as links to the logo and things like that. But you can't see everything in here, but the idea you can see that the context actually powered all of these little pieces and regionalize, personalize it based on the selected region. So what happened under the hood? Let's look under the hood of our grill, and under the hood of it, on the back end of the site, technically, the whole heavy lifting was done by the context module. I couldn't thank the contributors enough for that module. However, I could put all of the extra custom logic in pre-process and hooks, and I would be done with it. I quickly realized if I do this, then it would be harder to maintain in the future. It would be harder to onboard new team members. It also would be harder to collaborate, and we would have to call the same functions, loading the same entities over and over again. In order to avoid it, I decided that we need to come up with a service that would hold all of the helper methods. So I sat down and I spent time to just kind of brainstorming all possible helper methods that we would ever need in terms of loading the context by the taxonomy value, loading the field out of that taxonomy by the context, and vice versa. So every single possible thing. So like, I need the language by the context. Here we go. The default language by the context. Here we go. And menu by the context, and all of that. And I basically wrote all of the helper methods with documentation. So now if a developer comes in working on a different feature of the site, they wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel or understand necessarily how the context is set up. All they need to do is read the documentation on that service class and call the appropriate methods out of their modules and include that service as a dependency injection. The second part of it was event subscriber. We needed to redirect to specific regional pages. And in order to handle correct redirects, we created an event subscriber that would handle the redirects and correct requests. And the third part was not really required, but we still created it. It was an auto queries for the views. Now, we could take a step back and actually create views with all of these different displays. So, for example, on the search view, we would have a display filtered for Canadian region, and then we will have a display filtered for US region, and then so on and so forth. I quickly realized that we will create 20, 50, 60, and so on and so forth displays, and that will create a messy site build experience. It will also be harder to maintain, and again, we create a dependency on the site builder to be able to create additional regions, because I will have to go in and duplicate the display and set up a new condition. So that wasn't an option. So I came up with the solution to create an query alter, and we in the view set up the default filter, and then the query alter would fire, read the context value, and update the filter accordingly. So therefore, we had just one display per view, and then it's set up to automatically scale for new regions, and nobody needs to do any other development work. So that was another win that we had out of the regionalization setup. All right, so that challenge was done. We had our regionalized experience, we had our region set up, and we had all of these little pieces customized and served differently based on the regional context. Next challenge was an editorial experience. So main goal was to create once and publish everywhere. That means that editors shouldn't copy-paste content from one region to another, and in general, that helps them out to create better content and do more meaningful things in their day-to-day jobs. And they should be able to create it on one place and then select what regions that content should apply, because we definitely don't want to create the same content for all regions. We want to be able to selectively apply it. So one of the use cases would be, let's say we have a promotion for 5% off if you subscribe to the Instagram account, but that promotion only valid, for example, this time for UK, US, and Canada. Editors would want to create this promotion just once and then apply it for the UK, US, and Canadian regions. Now, moving forward with that, they also don't want to create translations for all of the possible languages because they are not applicable for this region. So if they were to create that promotion for Canada, they would want only English and French. And then for US, they would have English and Spanish. And then for UK, only English. And on top of it, let's say in UK, it would also require to follow the company on Twitter. But that wouldn't be a requirement for US and Canada. So in order to achieve that, we would need to allow editors to override the content on a region-to-region basis, on translation-to-translation basis. So that was the challenge. Knowing that, we came up with the concept of master-child relationship, where we created a master main nodes like a containers that were source of truth. Those sources of truth would contain all of the content, and then they would direct the creation of child nodes. Those child nodes will be placed in the menu, while master nodes will always stay behind the scene and never would be able to be placed in the menu. And then children can also sever the connection with the master node, become independent, and become overridden. So on the backend, that looks something like that. I was thinking to create two different content types. One would be a master product line, for example, and one would be a child product line. But that didn't make sense. That had a lot of overhead because they would have exactly the same fields. So instead, I just added a Boolean field called isMaster. That would determine if the node is master or if the node is a child. So when the node was marked as master, you would see the multi-value master region field where you could select multiple regions. So one master can belong to multiple regions. So for example, with our promotion, we would select Canada, US, and UK. And then translations of the master would allow to select different regions. So again, with this example, translating it into French, you would only select Canada. Translating it into Spanish, you would select US. And UK wouldn't have any translations at all. After that, master node onSafe would populate or create child nodes. So it would look into the database and check if they already have children attached to it. If it does, it would update it. If it doesn't, it would create it. And it would also check if there is any children that don't have any masters. And if they have exactly the same title as a master. So if that's the case, and the child node is not set to be explicitly overridden, then it would reconnect a child node to the master to avoid any orphans. On the child node setup, you would see that it's similar to master. However, the difference is that the region is now a single value field, and it's actually automatically populated by the master, and division is also automatically populated by the master. But if you select is overridden, then those fields become available for the editors, and editors could actually create just single region nodes. So just for UK or just for US, because then you don't really need to maintain this master-child relationship at all. And behind the scenes, the content would come through the master. So again, under the hood, what do we do under the hood? Under the hood, surprise, we created another service with a helper method that allowed us to do all of this synchronization. When was developing this functionality or thinking about it, fascinated by bricks module and paragraphs module and in general new and inline entity form that allowed duplication of the content. I was thinking, how do they do this? It might be so hard, so difficult, but yet that's just a button on the backend and you can have a new brick that is exactly the same copy. That's exactly what I needed. I looked into entity clone module as well. It was a little bit more complicated and not what I needed, but I was inspired by all of these modules. And my further investigation into their code showed me that the new Drupal 8 entity API actually had these duplication methods right inside that. And I was so surprised and delighted to know that. I used it to clone my child master nodes. So it's all core functionality. I just called the right methods. And I knew that cloning out children from the master could be quite a timely process, especially with the amount of regions growing. So we can't really control the amount of time depending on internet connection and also the complexity of information, amount of information, and so on and so forth. So I decided to wrap everything into the batch. So I created a custom submit handler that would plug in after the normal Drupal submit handler, and it would just launch a batch process, whereas every single child save would be a batch operation. And that was a wrap. We had a synchronization where editors could create just one node and then select which region to apply it, and it would go all the way to these children nodes. It was pretty effective, very fast. That was it. That was what we had. We already had regionalization, and we had editorial experience. Now we are up to the third challenge, personalization. So let's recap. We were having regionalized nodes served per URL. All of the context was read through the URL, so we were very cached. We didn't have to recalculate any context. It was all served through the URL. We had translation set up with additional languages set up just through Drupal UI, no custom code required. We had synchronization between nodes. What was left? Well, we actually needed to determine what region to serve, because all of this fantastic functionality would be nothing if we cannot serve the right region. And we needed to personalize experience based on the user interaction with the site. That said, we dived right into this channel. Serve the right region, we started evaluating how other companies doing it. And there are 1,000 plus one ways to achieve it right now. You could do it based on the user browser settings. You can geolocate. You can do all of these different things. We evaluated all of these methods. Unfortunately, none of them were very reliable, saying it's like 100% you in Canada. In this modern technology, you can't really do that because we have VPNs, we have shields, we have firewalls, we have so many things to trick the code. So we decided that we will go with IP, and instead of forcing a person into this region, we will suggest. So we will detect the IP and suggest that the person is in Canada or is in US. And then if that's the right choice, then the user can continue with the site. And if it's the wrong choice, they have a choice to actually choose one of the regions as they'd like. We will attach this event onto event subscriber and help with redirection. And then we will store the choice temporarily. So one of the another challenges that we were facing was GDPR compliance. And if you don't know what GDPR is, it's a privacy regulation that was released first in Europe Union, and now it's actually the variation of it is released in California, and it's actually going to cover eventually the whole world, the privacy regulations around the world. And it's important because people need to understand what websites are tracking, what privacy information is being stored and where. So we needed to make it compliant. That meant that we cannot use cookies, or we should limit a cookie. And also, one of the requirements would be the site has to continue working if the user opts out of the cookies. So because of that, we decided to use temporary storage, but not to store any personal information or IP or anything like that. We were only storing the choice, that the choice was made. So when we search first the pop-up, hey, I think you are in Canada, or I think you are in France, or in Germany, a user could either close the pop-up, and that was considered to be a choice, or they could continue and accept it, or they can choose a different region and continue as well. So any of the sections was considered to be a choice, and that choice was stored in a session, so that the choice was made, so that that pop-up doesn't come up every time I visit like a page, because that would mean that like you already chose the region. There is no point to actually keep smashing you with pop-up. And the rest of it was actually configured through the URL. So every URL would determine the context, and we didn't have to ask the user again or detect the IP again, because they were already redirected to the correct regionalized URL, and that regionalized URL would feed our context detection. All right, so that's how the choice window looked. It's basically a pop-up, and you have a region, and I was playing with the site before the session, and it correctly detected that I was in Canada. Now I could decline that, or I could change it. So for example, I'm on vacation in US, and it would detect that I am in US, but I would like to shop for a grill. I don't want to shop in US prices. I would like to shop in Canadian prices. So I would change the region to Canadian, and my choice will be recorded in the temporary storage. So what that approach did is that allowed users to be in control and change the region if they wanted to. It allowed us not to store users' personal data and allowed the site to work without any cookies. Think. All right, here we go. Hold on. Okay. So when that came in, across, we had these bigger chunks of personalization working. Then we decided to come up with a more granular personalization. And this is where Acquia Lift came into the picture. So what Acquia Lift does in the listening mode, it tracks user behavior and user properties. It's like Google Analytics on steroids. And it allows you to better understand behavior and needs of users on your website, analyzing what pages they visiting most, analyzing are they returning or not. So basically build a better marketing personas when you're analyzing the listening mode data. So we installed Acquia Lift module. And in a listening mode, we faced a new challenge, which was, again, GDPR compliance. So thank you to working with Acquia engineering team, we figured out how to overcome it and configure Lift to be triggered manually. So we tied it together to the cookie notice, and if a user accepted that notice, then Lift would kick in and start tracking the user. A user was able to opt out at any time and change any privacy settings, or make a different choice to delete their data from the site and things like that, and that would turn off Lift tracking. But we basically plug it in, so if the user accepts cookies, then Lift cookie would go in. And then taxonomy structure on the site that we already built with the divisions and the regions, it was a great backbone for starting segmentization on the website for the future phases when we would like to start building the pages with Page Builder. So results. So the results were that we had a site that was set up with all of the regions, and it empowered the editors. The editors were able to create new regions and divisions. They were able to add new languages. And in the future, they will be able to build the personalized experiences with slots using Page Builder and Lift experience. So all of that allowed us to actually build a solid digital experience platform for the Napoleon company to consolidate all of their web properties together under the same umbrella and have it all managed by their marketing department. So I would like to say thank you to Digital Echidna, because that project definitely wasn't just myself, but it was an effort of a brilliant team behind it. And I'm really thankful for every single person who worked with me on that, both on Digital Echidna side and on Napoleon. And I would like to say thank you to Kalamuna for allowing and supporting my presentation today as well. That's pretty much all I wanted to share. Time of Q&A, and please leave the feedback on this link. All right, let me see the questions. I see Can we use node as container instead of a taxonomy term? Sometimes it's harder to manage permissions on taxonomy term. Yes, definitely, that's an option. You can use nodes instead. We didn't want to use nodes because nodes table is a little bit an overkill versus taxonomy. Taxonomy, at least in my opinion, seems to be a little bit more lightweight. Permissions on taxonomy, there are additional contrib modules that you can use in order to set up more granular permissions on the taxonomy. There are taxonomy access modules, and in general, it becomes more and more close to other entities. Now you can publish it and unpublish as well. So definitely would encourage you to look into those, but you can use Node as if you'd like. Why did you use context taxonomy versus internationalization, which is in date core? Because I needed to be able to store additional values that wasn't really like provided by core. So I needed to be able to limit languages. I needed to be able to load menus, to redirect to new countries, to regions, to limit down solar searches based on the regions, and extending internationalization was a big effort than just using what was already there. Any advice for those who may be intimidated by the complexity the type of personalization will introduce? I'd say install the context module and play with it. You can start very simple by just, creating your taxonomy or any other condition and adding a class to a body and see what it does, or placing a block based on the context. And you can, like, little things can go a big way. There is also a smart content module, which is great for small personalization tasks as well. I would encourage you to take a look at this one. And just kind of start small, and you will get there with time. We use taxonomy terms to tag our nodes with specific markets, but haven't solved the redundant non-creation problem. There's Masterchild concept and stringent approach the problem solving. Yeah, so basically, you can also have a custom event controller that would allow you to serve a node based on like node ID. So another thing that you could do is create a custom route, and instead of rendering node with routes that or controllers that Drupal core provides, a custom route can read a controller and then render the node on multiple contexts. So that's another approach to it. So you would have a node, but you wouldn't really like just do like node/view. You wouldn't ever use this route. You would define a custom route, and you can pass a parameter of a node ID, and that would be able to, would be able to render certain nodes in this context, like on multiple places on the site. What do you say temporary storage? Do you mean the PHP session? Is it Drupal temp store? It's a user Drupal temp store. So on the user object, there is a temporary storage. It is alive until the session ends. And then when the session is done, the temp store also dies, but it's Drupal temporary storage. If you also considered domain access module, I looked at domain access module. It was a possibility, but it seemed to me a little bit more complicated and less customizable. In general, I'm a developer who prefers as close to core as possible. So whenever I was able to find like core solution or very lightweight contrib, I would always go with that. With domain access, it's a very robust solution, and I wasn't quite sure what exactly it was doing without deep dive into their code. So I was thinking like, if I can achieve it with core or like little to none contrib, then I would definitely go with this one. How is SEO handled? It's a good question. The different session views targeting different regions. Yes, that's a good question. We actually did SEO customization. It's a topic for a different session because that would take me another hour to answer. But we did a couple of alter hooks on meta tags and also on the language relationship links to target the correct regionalization and actually tell Google that this is US UK, this English UK, this is like English US and things like that. That all done through the hooks onto the meta tags and to the hooks into the header links for like alternative languages and relationships and things like that, and canonical URLs. How it was handled, again, with the context module. Context module was already providing us with the context, so I would just do the hook, and then that hook I would read out the context and alter meta tags and links like that. Have you used local storage session PHP? I used local storage, not a PHP session, because I am a fan when the user is fully in control and it's stored on their end than on the backend. And local storage was only stored to kind of select the timer of that model. So we didn't really store anything private in there. We just stored like, do you want to show it again or not? It was on top of the temporary storage. So we started with the temporary storage, but then some clients came back, users came back to us with the feedback that it was too short. So for example, if I were to close it, then I would get a different, like a window open, I would have that pop-up again, and people were quite upset by the amount of the pop-up. So we extended that period with the local storage. So if I were to choose it and my JavaScript was enabled and my browser would support local storage, they would have an extended period of that pop-up not showing up. So that the decision made flag would be stored both in temporary storage for the on a Drupal backend, and also for users that have local storage available also in the JavaScript as well. Do you have a single or multiple source languages? A single source languages. We have just single source language. The regional language is English for all of the regions for the simplicity. Can we still use ITIN and will it be conflicted? I think this one is actually different in D8. I just use a multilingual setup that was in core, and there was no conflicts with that. What was the time frame for the project and how many people had that? Well, it's kind of, as in any big Drupal website, the development never ends. I think the first phase with Grills was launched in about a year to 15 months. At the time, the team was about 3 to 4 developers plus front-end lead and PMs and account managers, I think, at the peak periods. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Any other questions? No? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a huge pleasure. If you have any questions or would like to connect with me, please feel free to ping me in the chat and hop in, or you can also find me on Drupal.org or on Twitter as Sunny Inotic. It was a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your DrupalCon.